The young woman's life had always been defined by chains, both seen and unseen. Every day of her existence was measured by the harsh rules of the man she was forced to call master. She moved quietly through the dusty rooms of the house, her hands rough and calloused from endless work. She had learned, over time, to make herself small, to speak only when spoken to, and to obey without question. Her world was small, limited to the walls of the property, the fields she worked, and the shadow of the man who controlled every aspect of her life. Yet, even in the darkest corners of her confinement, there was a small spark of hope she refused to let die. From the moment she woke in the mornings, she faced a strict routine designed to wear her down. The master's commands came early, sharp, and merciless. She would sweep floors until her arms ached, scrub surfaces until her hands were raw, and fetch water from the well in the sweltering sun. Each task was more grueling than the last, and she had learned that any mistake could bring swift punishment. She had seen it happen too many times. Others who had angered the master, punished publicly, their cries echoing through the house. Those sounds were warnings, and she obeyed diligently to avoid them. Despite the fear that surrounded her every movement, her mind often wandered to a place of escape, even if only in her imagination. She pictured herself walking through open fields, where the wind touched her face freely, where no one could command her to work or punish her for a misstep. In her thoughts, she wandered through forests, along rivers, and beneath endless skies that promised freedom. It was these small escapes of imagination that kept her spirit alive, a fragile flame flickering in the darkness of her reality. The master was a man with a cruel temper and little compassion. He took pleasure in controlling those around him, believing his power gave him the right to dominate every life in his domain. His words could cut deeper than a knife, and his punishments were swift and unforgiving. He rarely showed kindness, and when he did, it was fleeting, confusing, and often followed by even harsher demands. For the young woman, the house was not a home, it was a cage, and the man inside it was a constant reminder of everything she had lost: freedom, choice, and dignity. Yet, in the small moments between the chores and the fear, she found ways to preserve her sense of self. She whispered poems under her breath, remembered stories her mother once told her, and watched the world outside the windows with longing. Sometimes, she would catch glimpses of birds taking flight or trees swaying in the wind. And for a few precious seconds, she felt a taste of the freedom she had never known. She clung to these moments, like lifelines, holding on to the belief that one day, her life could be different. The people around her were few. Some were older servants who had accepted their fate, and their resigned expressions served as constant reminders of what awaited her if she faltered. Others were outsiders who came and went, never truly noticing the young woman chained in service, and never questioning the life she was forced to lead. She learned quickly how to remain invisible, to move without drawing attention, to exist without being seen. It was not a life anyone would call full or happy, but it was a life she had mastered, at least enough to survive. Her nights were the hardest. When the house grew silent and the master retreated to his own quarters, she would sit alone, sometimes on the cold floor, feeling the weight of her chains more keenly than ever. Sleep was not a refuge, it was filled with dreams of the past, of happier times she could barely remember, and of a future she desperately longed for but could not yet reach. Often, she cried quietly, the sound muffled by the walls around her, knowing that no one would hear and no one would care. These moments of sorrow were hers alone, private and sacred, a reminder that even in captivity, her heart was still alive and still capable of hope. She had developed a keen sense of observation, learning the moods and patterns of the master and the few others who ruled over her life. She understood the tone of his voice, the way his footsteps sounded when angered, and the subtle signals that preceded punishment. This awareness became her survival mechanism. Every action she took was calculated to avoid conflict, to stay just out of reach of his wrath, and to preserve the small safety she had carved for herself. It was exhausting work, but it was necessary. Life had taught her to be clever, to read people, and to anticipate danger. Even with all the hardship, there were moments that reminded her of her own strength. She remembered small victories, like completing a task perfectly or finding a hidden corner to rest for a few minutes without being caught. These small triumphs were her own, proof that even in a life of oppression, she could exert some control. They gave her courage and resilience, building her resolve quietly, day by day. The young woman also held a sense of longing for connection, though she rarely allowed herself to act on it. The loneliness was profound, a constant ache that reminded her she was human, not merely property. She longed for someone to understand her, someone to see her as a person rather than a tool. This desire remained tucked away, dangerous to acknowledge in her environment. Yet it shaped her dreams of a different life, a life where she could form bonds based on trust and kindness, not fear and coercion. Nature was her silent companion. When she could sneak a glimpse through a window or a crack in the fence, she observed the world outside with intense curiosity. The trees, the sun, the birds, and the wind became symbols of freedom. They represented a life she had never touched, but desperately wanted. In these moments, her imagination painted vivid pictures of a world beyond chains. A world where she could run, speak, and laugh without fear. These fleeting moments of beauty were treasured more than any physical comfort the house could offer. Despite everything, she remained determined not to let her spirit be completely broken. She knew that someday, somehow, she would find a way out. The idea of escape was not just a dream, it was a necessity for survival. Her mind constantly worked on plans, imagining routes, hiding places, and moments to seize opportunity. Even though she had no clear way forward, the hope of freedom was a force stronger than fear, pushing her forward through every exhausting day. Her life, though harsh, taught her lessons no one else could. She learned patience, resilience, and the quiet courage to endure. She understood the value of small joys and the importance of hope, even in the bleakest moments. Every day, in chains, reinforced her desire for freedom, shaping a determination that could not be extinguished. In the midst of suffering, she found a quiet strength, a deep knowledge that life was not meant to be endured in silence and oppression forever. The young woman's story in those early days was one of shadows and longing, fear and resilience. She had not yet tasted freedom, nor had she encountered the person who would change the course of her life. But even in that darkness, her heart held a secret power, a spark that refused to be snuffed out. It was this spark that would carry her through, guiding her toward the moment when chains would fall, and she would step into a life of choice, dignity, and hope. And so, each day, she continued her routine, her mind alive with dreams, her heart quietly rebelling against the life forced upon her. She moved through the house and the fields, surviving, enduring, and holding on. For in the depths of her being, she knew that life could not always be like this, and somewhere, somehow, freedom awaited. The young woman had lived her entire life in a world of chains and harsh rules, where every day felt like a battle for survival. Yet, on that quiet morning, as the sun began to rise over the dusty fields, a change was approaching, one that she had never imagined. From the horizon, a figure appeared, moving steadily toward the property. It was a man, tall and broad, dressed in rugged clothes that had clearly seen much travel. His hat shaded his eyes, but there was something unmistakable in his presence, a confidence, a purpose, and a calm authority that immediately set him apart from anyone she had ever encountered. The woman noticed him from a distance, hidden behind the wooden fence that enclosed the property. She had learned to watch carefully. 5 war, 1 standard, for the master's temper could turn violent in an instant. Yet, as she observed the man approaching, she felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Who was he? Why had he come here? And most importantly, would he be a threat or something else entirely? Her heart beat faster, a mixture of excitement and caution. The cowboy, because that was what he seemed to be, did not rush. He walked with deliberate steps, scanning the surroundings with sharp, experienced eyes. He noticed the overgrown weeds along the fences, the worn paths where the woman moved each day, and the signs of a harsh life etched into the land itself. To an ordinary person, these details might have seemed insignificant. But to him, they told a story, one of hardship, control, and a life lived under constant pressure. His instincts told him something was wrong here, and he knew he had to investigate carefully. The young woman watched silently, her body tense. She had been trained to remain unnoticed, to blend into the background. And yet now, she found herself caught in the gaze of a stranger who seemed to see more than anyone else had. There was no fear in his eyes, only understanding and a quiet determination. It was as if he could sense the pain and the longing that she had hidden so carefully for so many years. For the first time in her life, she felt a flicker of hope, not just a dream, but the real possibility that someone had come to help her. The master, meanwhile, was inside the house, unaware of the visitor. He was a man of arrogance and pride, believing that his power over others was absolute. He would never have imagined that someone could arrive unannounced, someone strong enough to challenge him. The young woman knew the danger this presented. If the master noticed the stranger, he could become violent, and she could once again face punishment for something beyond her control. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she remained still, hidden, silently praying that the man's intentions were good. The cowboy approached the front of the house and paused. He studied the doors and windows, noting how they were reinforced, how the shadows moved, and how the woman lingered just out of reach. He could sense her fear, but also the strength beneath it. He understood that freeing her would not be simple. It would require both courage and careful planning. Yet he did not hesitate. He had come for a reason, and he would not turn away. He called out, his voice firm but not harsh. "I know she's here. I know what's been happening. Release her." His words carried authority, and the master froze, startled by the unexpected confrontation. He laughed. A cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the property. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" he shouted. "She is mine, and she will do as I say." The young woman's stomach tightened. She had feared this moment, the clash between the man who had controlled her life and this new stranger who seemed determined to change it. She wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but her voice caught in her throat. She could only watch, hidden, as the tension built outside the walls of her prison. The cowboy's eyes did not waver. He stepped closer, his hand resting near the holster at his side. Not in threat, but in readiness. "I am not here to argue," he said calmly, "but I will not leave without her. You have no right to keep her in chains." His words were measured, but every syllable carried the weight of determination. The master sneered, dismissing the man's warning. But there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had not anticipated resistance, not from someone who seemed so calm and in control. The young woman felt her pulse quicken. Could it be possible that this man would actually save her? For so long, she had only dreamed of freedom, imagined what it would be like to escape the endless chores, the fear, the punishment. And now, it seemed that her dream might come true, though she dared not hope fully. Her eyes followed the cowboy's movements, noting how carefully he assessed the situation, how he seemed to move with quiet authority and precision. The master, growing angry at the lack of immediate compliance, raised his voice, shouting orders and threats. The tension in the air was palpable. The young woman felt a mixture of fear and anticipation, unsure of what would happen next. Yet, she could sense a change. The cowboy was not like anyone she had ever seen before. He was calm where others were volatile, steady where others were reckless, and determined where others were weak. She clung to this observation, holding on to the hope that he was indeed here to help her. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine escape not just in dreams, but as a real possibility. She pictured herself stepping out of the house, walking beside the man who had come for her, feeling the sun on her face and the wind in her hair. She imagined the chains falling from her wrists, the fear leaving her body, replaced by a sense of freedom she had never known. It was a terrifying thought, but also exhilarating. The cowboy, sensing the growing tension, remained calm and steady. He continued to speak, carefully choosing his words to assert authority without provoking immediate violence. "You have been cruel to her," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It ends today." The master laughed, but there was a flicker of unease beneath the surface. He did not understand the resolve in the cowboy's eyes, nor the certainty that his control over the young woman was about to be challenged. The young woman could hardly believe what she was witnessing. Someone had come for her, someone willing to stand against the master and his cruelty. She felt a wave of emotion, fear, relief, and a tentative sense of hope wash over her. Her heart beat rapidly, but she dared to imagine a life beyond the walls of the property, beyond the chains, beyond the constant fear that had defined her existence. The cowboy's presence was like a shield, a protective force standing between her and the oppression she had endured for so long. He did not speak to her yet, for he knew that the moment required patience. Every action had to be measured, every word carefully considered. He studied the master, assessing his temperament, his weaknesses, and the best way to ensure the young woman's safety. His focus was unwavering, his purpose clear. The master, growing frustrated and angry, began pacing, muttering threats under his breath. The young woman watched, feeling both dread and anticipation. She knew that the confrontation could turn dangerous at any moment. Yet, for the first time in her life, she also knew that someone was on her side. Someone who would not abandon her to the cruelty she had endured for so long. The cowboy remained silent for a moment, allowing the tension to build, his eyes never leaving the master. Then, in a voice calm but firm, he repeated his demand. "Release her. You no longer have the right to hold her. She is free to come with me." There was an undeniable strength in his words, a clarity of purpose that made it impossible for the master to dismiss him outright. The young woman felt her heart leap. Could it really be happening? Could she finally step out of the darkness of her life into something new, something real? She had dreamed of freedom for so long that the possibility seemed almost unreal. Yet the presence of the cowboy, his calm determination, and the courage he displayed gave her the first real sense that escape was possible. She remained hidden for the moment, watching, waiting, and hoping. Every instinct in her body told her to be cautious, to stay silent, to trust carefully. Yet, even in the midst of fear, she could feel the first stirrings of courage. The courage that would soon allow her to take her first steps toward freedom. The cowboy's presence marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. For the first time, she felt that someone understood her pain and recognized her worth. It was a small spark, but it was enough to ignite hope, a hope that would carry her forward through the challenges to come. She knew that the journey ahead would not be simple, that obstacles and danger awaited, but for the first time, she felt that she might finally be able to leave the chains behind. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the young woman felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. Her heart filled with a fragile yet powerful hope. The cowboy had arrived, not as a stranger, but as a lifeline. And in that moment, hidden behind the fence, she realized that the life she had endured for so long was about to change forever. The tension on the property had reached its peak. The young woman remained hidden, her body pressed against the rough wooden fence, her eyes wide with both fear and anticipation. She could see the cowboy standing just a few feet from the master, his posture calm, but every movement precise and ready for action. He did not speak unnecessarily. Instead, he let his presence alone convey his purpose. The master, on the other hand, was growing restless. His face flushed with anger and frustration, his fists clenching and unclenching as he struggled to maintain control. The young woman's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold. She had never seen anyone confront the master so directly. For years, everyone in the house had obeyed him without question, fearful of the consequences of defiance. And now, this stranger, this cowboy, stood firmly in his path, unafraid of the man who had ruled over her life with fear and cruelty. It was as if the cowboy carried a strength that the master could not match, a quiet power that demanded attention and respect. "You cannot keep her like this anymore," the cowboy said, his voice steady but firm. "She has the right to live freely. She has done nothing to deserve your cruelty." His words were calm, deliberate, and filled with authority. The master's face twisted into a sneer, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had never been challenged in this way, and it unsettled him. He tried to laugh it off, to regain control through mockery. "She is mine," the master shouted, his voice booming across the property. "She belongs to me. You cannot take what is mine." His words were sharp and angry, but the certainty in his tone had diminished. The cowboy remained composed, his gaze locked on the master, unshaken by the outburst. It was clear that he had anticipated this reaction and was ready for whatever might come next. The young woman's chest tightened. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. After years of suffering in silence, she was witnessing a confrontation that could change everything for her. She had long dreamed of freedom, but the reality of it, of someone actually standing up for her, was almost too much to comprehend. She stayed hidden, afraid to move, yet her heart was filled with a strange, thrilling hope. Could this be the moment her life would finally change? The cowboy's hand rested near his holster, not in threat, but in readiness. He had to act carefully, for one wrong move could provoke the master into violence. Every second stretched, heavy with tension. The master took a step forward, his voice rising, his body tense. It was clear that he was weighing his options, trying to decide whether to attack, flee, or continue his threats. The cowboy's calm presence challenged him in a way no one else ever had. "You've been cruel for too long," the cowboy continued, his voice low but commanding. "It ends now. You will release her, or I will make sure she never suffers under your control again." There was a firmness in his words that left no room for argument. The young woman could see the determination in his eyes, the unwavering belief that what he was doing was right. For the first time, she felt that someone truly believed she deserved better, that someone cared enough to risk danger to help her. The master's anger escalated. He shouted, waving his arms, attempting to intimidate both the cowboy and the young woman. But the cowboy did not waver. He moved deliberately, assessing the situation with a careful eye. He knew that any sudden or reckless action could put the young woman at risk, and he refused to allow that. Every decision he made was calculated, precise, and focused on one goal: her safety. The young woman's mind raced. She had imagined escape countless times, but she had never anticipated it happening in such a dramatic and dangerous way. She could see the fear in the master's eyes now, the first hint that his control was slipping. It was a feeling she had longed for, and yet it terrified her. The unknown was always frightening, and while the possibility of freedom thrilled her, it also made her cautious. She knew she could not rush forward. She had to wait for the right moment. The cowboy's voice cut through the tension once more. "Step aside," he commanded, his tone calm but unyielding. "Let her go. This is your only chance to avoid worse consequences." The master laughed bitterly, but there was a hesitation in his laughter, a pause that betrayed the uncertainty he felt. For the first time, he realized that he might not be in control, that his power could be challenged and defeated. The young woman's heart leapt. Could it be true? Could this stranger, this cowboy, actually free her from the life of oppression she had endured for so long? She held her breath, watching closely as the tension built to its peak. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was the turning point, the moment where her life would shift from fear and chains to freedom and possibility. The master, sensing the threat, raised his voice even louder, shouting insults and threats, trying to assert dominance. But the cowboy remained unshaken. His presence alone was a shield, a force that could not be ignored. The young woman felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation, knowing that the situation could become dangerous at any moment. Yet, she also knew that hope was within reach, and that this man would not abandon her. Time seemed to stretch as the confrontation continued. The cowboy studied the master, waiting for the exact moment to act. Every movement, every word, was carefully calculated. The young woman could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, as though the world itself was holding its breath. She remained hidden, watching, hoping, and silently praying that this man would succeed in freeing her. Finally, the moment arrived. The master, frustrated and angry, made a sudden move toward the young woman, as if to assert his control through intimidation. But the cowboy was faster. In a decisive, controlled action, he fired a warning shot that stopped the master in his tracks. The sound echoed across the property, startling birds into flight and sending a shiver down the young woman's spine. It was loud, frightening, and yet exhilarating. The master froze, realizing that the cowboy was serious, that he was willing to act to protect the young woman. The young woman could hardly believe what had happened. She had never imagined that her life could change so suddenly, that freedom could arrive in such a dramatic way. Her heart pounded with fear and excitement as she watched the cowboy take a step closer, his gaze unwavering, his presence protective. She felt a mixture of relief and disbelief, the first real sense that she might finally escape the life she had endured for so long. The master, realizing he was outmatched, hesitated. His anger turned to panic as he saw that his control over the young woman was slipping. The cowboy did not give him a chance to recover. "Step back," he said firmly. "She comes with me now." She could feel the chains of her old life loosening, the weight of fear beginning to lift. Every instinct told her to be cautious. But she also knew that this was her chance. Slowly, carefully, she moved toward the cowboy, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. He extended a hand, steady and reassuring, a silent promise that she would be safe. The young woman reached out, her fingers brushing against his, and in that simple touch, she felt the first real sense of freedom she had ever known. The cowboy guided her away from the house, keeping his eyes on the master to ensure no sudden danger would come. The young woman's heart raced with every step. She was leaving behind a life of fear, of chains, of endless oppression. The world outside, once only imagined, was becoming real. She felt the sun on her face, the wind in her hair, and a sense of hope filling her chest. For the first time, she realized that she could live, that she could be free, that she could choose her own path. As they moved further from the property, the young woman began to take in the world around her. The fields stretched out in golden waves. The sky was vast and clear, and the air smelled of freedom and possibility. She could hardly believe that she had ever been trapped, that her life had once been confined to fear and chains. And yet, now, with the cowboy beside her, she felt a strength growing within her, a courage that would carry her through whatever lay ahead. The cowboy did not speak much as they moved. He understood that words were not always necessary, that sometimes presence and action conveyed more than speech. The young woman, though trembling with emotion, felt a sense of trust forming. She knew that he would not abandon her, that he would protect her, and that together they would leave the past behind. By the time they reached a small, shaded area at the edge of the property, the young woman began to feel a sense of calm settle over her. The chains that had bound her for so long were gone, and in their place was a feeling she had only imagined in dreams. Safety, hope, and the first real sense of freedom. She looked at the cowboy, gratitude and wonder filling her eyes, knowing that her life had changed forever. The young woman's heart was still racing as she followed the cowboy away from the house, where her life had been nothing but chains, fear, and endless work. Every step felt like a small victory, but the reality of escape was overwhelming. She had never truly imagined walking freely, feeling the wind on her face without the looming shadow of the master threatening her every move. Now, she was stepping into a world she had only dreamed of. Guided by a man whose calm presence gave her a sense of safety she had never known. The cowboy moved with steady, purposeful steps, keeping a watchful eye on the surroundings. He had spent years in the wild, learning to read the land, anticipate danger, and protect those who could not protect themselves. To him, the young woman's safety was now his responsibility, and he took it seriously. Every glance he cast toward the horizon, every pause to listen for distant sounds, reflected a man who understood the risks of freedom in a world that could be cruel. For the young woman, every detail of the journey was new and overwhelming. She noticed the gentle sway of the tall grass, the way the sunlight painted golden patterns on the earth, and the sound of birds chirping above them. Each sight and sound reminded her that there was a life beyond fear, a life where beauty existed even in the simplest things. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with fresh air, tasting a freedom she had never known existed. Her body still trembled from adrenaline, but for the first time, she allowed herself to feel relief, wonder, and hope. The cowboy spoke little, but when he did, his words were steady, comforting, and purposeful. "You're safe now," he said, glancing back at her. "But we need to keep moving. He won't give up easily." The young woman nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. She had been trapped for so long that the idea of safety was almost foreign. Yet, she felt it now not just as a word, but as a tangible reality she could experience with every step she took away from her past. They moved across open fields, the earth soft beneath their feet, and the wind carrying away the tension that had weighed so heavily on her shoulders. The cowboy occasionally paused, pointing out safe paths, avoiding areas where the master or his allies might appear. Every decision he made was deliberate, showing a careful balance between speed and caution. The young woman began to realize that freedom was not just about leaving the past behind. It was also about learning to navigate the world carefully, thoughtfully, and with awareness. Along the journey, the young woman began to feel emotions she had long buried. Fear had dominated her life for so many years, but now it mingled with exhilaration and gratitude. She felt a strange mixture of vulnerability and strength, knowing that she depended on the cowboy for protection, yet also discovering a courage within herself she had never known. Every step forward was a step into a new identity, a person who could make choices, take action, and begin to live for herself. The cowboy noticed the changes in her, subtle but unmistakable. Her shoulders, once hunched with fear, began to straighten. Her eyes, which had always darted nervously, now held a spark of determination. He spoke words of encouragement, simple and kind, telling her to trust herself, to keep moving, and to believe that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. These words were small but powerful, planting seeds of confidence that would grow as they continued their journey. They encountered small challenges along the way: uneven terrain, a sudden downpour, and the constant awareness that danger could still lurk nearby. Each challenge tested both the cowboy and the young woman. But together, they managed to navigate obstacles carefully. The cowboy guided her hand when needed, offered support when she stumbled, and never allowed her to feel alone. Slowly, the young woman realized that trust, once unimaginable, could exist between two people. She began to relax slightly, knowing that she was not just escaping chains, but also learning to rely on kindness and guidance from another human being. As they rested for brief moments beneath the shade of large trees, the young woman asked timid questions about the world outside her prison. The cowboy answered patiently, explaining how to move safely, how to read the land, and how to notice signs of both danger and opportunity. He told her stories of people he had helped before, of the small triumphs that came from courage and persistence. These stories fascinated her, giving her insight into a life where bravery and hope could create real change. She listened intently, absorbing every detail, realizing that the world was far larger and more beautiful than she had ever imagined. The journey also allowed the young woman to reflect on her past. Memories of the harsh life she had endured surfaced: the long hours of labor, the fear, the moments of quiet despair. She felt sorrow for the years lost to cruelty and chains, yet she also felt a growing sense of empowerment. The very fact that she had survived, endured, and now was moving toward freedom was a testament to her inner strength. The cowboy noticed her moments of reflection and offered gentle reassurance, reminding her that she had done nothing wrong, that her courage had brought her this far, and that the future held promise beyond anything she had known. As the day progressed, the landscape gradually changed. The open fields gave way to small hills, and the air carried a fresher, more vibrant scent. The young woman noticed streams of water glistening in the sunlight, birds darting through the trees, and the endless expanse of sky overhead. Each sight filled her with a growing sense of wonder. She realized that freedom was not just the absence of chains, it was the presence of choice, beauty, and the ability to feel fully alive. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile. A small but powerful expression of joy that had been absent from her life for years. The cowboy encouraged her smile, but also reminded her to remain aware. "Freedom comes with responsibility," he said softly. "You are free, yes. But the world can be unpredictable. Stay aware, and you'll find strength you didn't know you had." The young woman nodded, understanding the balance between hope and caution. She was beginning to learn that freedom was not only about leaving the past behind, but also about embracing life fully, with both its beauty and its challenges. Night approached, and the two found a safe place to rest. The cowboy built a small fire, careful to remain hidden, and shared simple food. The young woman marveled at the taste of bread, meat, and fresh water, the first proper meal she had enjoyed in years. She felt a growing sense of security, knowing that for the first time, she did not have to fear what the next moment would bring. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of a life she could now hope to live, a life where chains no longer bound her body or her spirit. In those quiet moments by the fire, the young woman began to see the cowboy not just as a protector, but as someone who believed in her worth. His actions had given her freedom, but his respect and guidance gave her confidence. She realized that the journey was not just physical, but emotional and mental as well. Every step, every story, every word of encouragement was helping her rebuild herself, piece by piece. By morning, the young woman felt stronger, braver, and more determined. The journey ahead was long, and freedom was not yet complete. But she knew she was ready. The cowboy stood beside her, a silent guardian, allowing her the space to step forward into her new life. She could feel the wind in her hair, the sun warming her face, and the earth firm beneath her feet. For the first time, she understood the true meaning of escape. It was not just leaving a place behind, but embracing a life of choice, courage, and possibility. The journey continued, and with each passing hour, the young woman grew more aware of her own strength. She had survived chains, cruelty, and fear, and now, walking beside the cowboy, she was learning to thrive. Every step brought new sights, new sensations, and new lessons. She was no longer a captive in her own life. She was a traveler, a survivor, and a woman discovering the world on her own terms. By the time they paused again, the young woman knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more lessons to learn, and more courage required. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready. She had a protector, a guide, and most importantly, a chance to live freely. Her heart, once heavy with fear and despair, now carried hope and determination. She realized that freedom was not just about leaving chains behind. It was about embracing life fully, bravely, and with an open heart. And so, the young woman continued to walk, step by step, with the cowboy by her side. Each mile carried her farther from the house of her captivity, and closer to a life filled with possibility. The journey was long, the path uncertain, but her spirit, once buried under fear, now soared with courage and hope. She knew that she was not just escaping her past, she was stepping into a future she had always dreamed of. A life where she could finally be herself, free and unafraid. The young woman awoke to the soft light of dawn, feeling a sense of peace she had never known in her life. For the first time, she could rise without fear of punishment, without the weight of chains on her wrists, or the threat of cruelty hanging over her. The night had been calm, the fire long extinguished, and the world around her seemed full of promise. She looked around at the open fields, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, and the clear blue sky stretching endlessly above. It was a freedom she had only ever dreamed of, and now it was real. The cowboy stood nearby, watching over her with the same quiet determination he had shown from the moment they had left the house. He said little, but the young woman could sense the protection and guidance in his presence. She realized that the journey of escape was only the beginning. Now she would need to learn how to live freely, how to make her own choices, and how to embrace a life she had been denied for so long. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. Their first steps into this new life were cautious. The young woman had spent so many years in fear that independence felt unfamiliar. She stumbled slightly as she adjusted to the sensation of walking with confidence, the wind on her face, and the sunlight warming her skin. The cowboy smiled gently, encouraging her without words, letting her find her balance both physically and emotionally. In that quiet guidance, she felt a sense of trust growing stronger between them. Over the following days, the young woman began to discover her own abilities. She learned to move with awareness, reading the land, and understanding the signs of safety and danger. The cowboy taught her how to navigate through forests, cross streams, and recognize landmarks, but he also encouraged her to make her own decisions, to trust her instincts, and to take responsibility for her choices. With each lesson, she grew more confident, her fear slowly giving way to courage. The young woman also began to learn skills she had never known. She discovered how to tend to small fires, gather clean water, and even prepare simple meals. At first, these tasks seemed daunting, but she quickly realized that she was capable of more than she had imagined. Each success, no matter how small, filled her with a sense of pride and accomplishment. She began to understand that freedom was not just the absence of chains, it was the ability to live fully, to make decisions, and to feel capable of handling the challenges life might bring. Along the journey, the cowboy shared stories of others he had helped, and of the lives he had seen transformed through courage and hope. The young woman listened with fascination, absorbing every detail. She realized that life could be far more than survival. It could be about growth, kindness, and learning from every experience. She began to see herself not as someone who had been broken by cruelty, but as a person with strength, resilience, and the ability to shape her own destiny. As the days passed, the young woman began to speak more freely. For years, her words had been limited, controlled, and stifled. Now, she found a voice she had never truly known. She asked questions about the world, shared her thoughts and feelings, and even laughed at stories the cowboy told. Each word, each expression, was a declaration of life, a life that she now had the right to live fully and openly. The freedom to speak, to think, and to express herself was intoxicating, and she savored every moment of it. The cowboy watched her transformation with quiet satisfaction. He had rescued her from chains, yes, but he also understood that true freedom required more than physical escape. It required confidence, self-respect, and the courage to embrace life. He encouraged her to explore, to test her limits, and to trust in her abilities. Slowly, the young woman began to see herself through his eyes not as a captive, but as a capable, strong, and deserving individual. Together, they traveled to safer areas, places where the young woman could begin to rebuild her life without fear. She learned to identify safe paths, to gather food and water, and to find shelter. The cowboy guided her, but he allowed her to take the lead whenever she felt ready. Each successful decision strengthened her confidence and deepened her belief in her own strength. She realized that the lessons she had learned in captivity, resilience, observation, and patience could now serve her in building a life of her own choosing. The young woman also began to form a deeper understanding of kindness and trust. She had known fear and cruelty for so long that it had shaped her expectations of others. Now, with the cowboy's consistent care and support, she began to see that there were people who could be trusted, who could act with integrity and compassion. This realization was transformative. It allowed her to open her heart gradually, to accept help without fear, and to believe in the goodness of others. As the days turned into weeks, the young woman's sense of independence grew. She began to plan small parts of their journey, suggesting paths to follow, identifying areas where they could rest safely, and even offering solutions to minor problems they encountered. The cowboy encouraged her initiative, praising her insight and reinforcing the idea that she was now capable of making meaningful choices. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of agency, a realization that she could shape her own destiny. During this time, the young woman also reflected on her past with a growing sense of understanding. She no longer felt completely consumed by anger or sorrow. Instead, she saw her experiences as part of her story, a story that had brought her to this moment of freedom and opportunity. The hardships she had endured had forged a resilience that now empowered her. She realized that while the past could not be changed, the future was hers to shape. The cowboy remained a steady presence throughout this transformation. He did not overshadow her growth but supported it, providing guidance when needed and encouragement when she faltered. His presence was both reassuring and liberating. She understood that she owed him gratitude for his role in her escape, but she also recognized that her true power came from within herself, from the courage and determination she had nurtured even during her darkest days. By the time they reached a small settlement, the young woman had grown into a confident and capable individual. She could navigate the world independently, make choices, and face challenges with courage. The settlement offered opportunities to learn new skills, meet people, and begin to build a life free from fear. The young woman felt a sense of belonging for the first time, a feeling that she had been denied for most of her life. She began to dream of a future where she could pursue her own goals, contribute meaningfully to a community, and experience the simple joys of life that had once been out of reach. She found work in the settlement, performing tasks that allowed her to use her skills and grow even further. She learned the value of independence, hard work, and integrity. People began to recognize her strength and resilience, admiring her determination and resourcefulness. For the young woman, these moments were deeply satisfying. She realized that she was no longer defined by her past, but by the choices she made and the life she was building for herself. Throughout this transformation, the young woman's relationship with the cowboy evolved as well. They were no longer simply rescuer and rescued. They were partners in the journey of life. She came to trust him deeply, not out of dependence, but out of mutual respect and shared experience. He remained a guide and protector, but she also recognized her own abilities and the role she had played in claiming her freedom. Together, they represented a balance of strength, trust, and support. The young woman also began to embrace the joys of life she had never known. She explored the beauty of the land around her, felt the warmth of the sun, and listened to the sounds of nature without fear. She laughed freely, made friends, and even discovered small pleasures in work, learning, and helping others. These simple joys were profound to her, marking a life that had once been denied, now fully within her reach. As time passed, the young woman came to understand the true meaning of freedom. It was not just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice, dignity, and the opportunity to grow. She recognized her own strength, the resilience that had carried her through her darkest days, and the courage that had allowed her to step forward when freedom finally arrived. She had transformed from a captive into a confident, empowered woman, ready to embrace life fully. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, the young woman stood quietly, reflecting on her journey. She had survived cruelty, endured hardship, and faced fear with courage. She had escaped chains, both physical and emotional, and had learned to trust, hope, and dream once more. The cowboy stood beside her, watching the fading light, with quiet satisfaction, knowing that the young woman had claimed her freedom and would continue to thrive. For the first time in her life, the young woman felt complete. She had escaped the life of fear and oppression that had once defined her existence. She had learned to trust, to act with courage, and to embrace the world around her. She had discovered that her strength and resilience were greater than she had ever imagined. And as she looked toward the future, she realized that her life was now hers to shape, filled with possibility, hope, and the promise of a new beginning. Her story had not ended with chains and fear. It had begun with freedom, courage, and the chance to build a life she could truly call her own. She had survived, she had grown, and she had been transformed. The young woman now stood not as a victim of her past, but as a survivor, empowered, hopeful, and ready to embrace every opportunity the world had to offer. Her journey had been long and difficult, but it had led her to a life of dignity, independence, and the knowledge that she was finally, truly free.